Since it was announced, the Bambu Lab X2D has caused an extremely large amount of excitement, but it's also generated quite a bit of confusion, especially in terms of how it compares to the P2S, which is now in kind of a confusing spot in Bambu's lineup. So right here I have the Bambu Lab X2D. Bambu did send this to me at no cost. I'm not under any obligation to make a review, say anything, do anything, or anything, but I am really curious to compare it with the P2S that I bought last fall. So this is the X2D, this is the P2S. Fight! Or we'll just compare and talk about them. We are going to talk about the highlight features of the X2D, but I'm not going to go into crazy technical details. There are already a ton of really great videos that do that. Instead, I really want to focus on how these two printers compare to each other. So right off the bat, let's talk about physical differences. In terms of size, they're exactly the same, about the size of a mini fridge. There are some differences externally with the X2D. It does have a darker case, and it also has little windows on either side, which I actually really love the windows. One, because they look cool, and two, as somebody who makes videos about 3D printers, they give me a really cool little place to film and let me get some cool angles. And from a more practical point of view, literally in this case, you can get a better view of your print. So you can make sure that things are doing exactly what they're supposed to do. Everything's working okay. I like having a window on either side. That's pretty fantastic. Otherwise, it has the same screen, same everything externally until you get to the back of the printer. This is where you'll notice quite a few differences. My P2S still does have the older back panel. I haven't replaced it yet. When Bambu released the P2S, it had one style of back panel that sort of had like exhaust vents in certain places, and they have since updated it. So if you bought your P2S pretty much since December-ish of 2025, you should have the new back panel. And if you have an original P2S that has the original back panel, Bambu will actually send you an updated one for free. Now the updated back panel of the P2S looks a bit more similar to the X2D, especially in terms of where the exhaust fan is located, but the X2D does come with its exhaust fan, so that's not something you have to get extra. But you'll also notice that the X2D has extra tubes behind it because it is a dual nozzle printer. And that's where some of the confusion comes into play, because this is a dual nozzle printer with active heating and some of, the exhaust fan, all these other cool features. And the combo, the printer plus the AMS Pro 2, has a retail price of $899, which was actually pretty shocking when it's released, because Bambu's other multi-nozzle printers, the H2D and the H2C, have significantly higher prices. Now the P2S, on the other hand, I thought was an absolutely phenomenal value when I bought it last fall, and the combo for the printer and the AMS Pro 2 at the time I'm recording this is $799. So that is the point of confusion. There is only a $100 price difference between these two printers, and so naturally that is causing a lot of people to just go for the X2D. If you're already in this deep, why not go X2 deep and just spend $100 more and get a lot more features? But I actually think there's a bit more subtlety to it than just spend a little more money and get a lot more features. And I think that there's something Bambu could do, and is maybe even likely to do, that will further differentiate these two printers and especially give the P2S a more clear spot in their lineup. So I'll talk about that at the end of the video when we go through after we've gone through all the features and stuff. So let's now jump inside the X2D to see a bit more about how these printers are different from one another. And right away, the easiest thing to notice is that the X2D has two nozzles. It's a dual nozzle printer, but there is a rather large asterisk by that. And what I mean by that is, unlike the H2D and the H2C, which are dual nozzle printers, and you can use both nozzles for any kind of filament, they're basically exactly the same. In the case of the H2C, it's also interchangeable, so there's even more versatility there. The X2D has a limited second nozzle, so it cannot print every type of filament that you would print in the main nozzle. If you're doing a lot of PLA only printing, then you do kind of get that dual nozzle setup, and it works out really well. And the other big benefit that is being promoted with the dual nozzle system is the ability to use that extra nozzle specifically for support material. So basically that means if you're printing a model that has parts that essentially hang over mid-air, and since the printer can't print just in mid-air because it's not magic yet, you then need to create support material, which is basically just a structure that the model can rest on, and then you will remove that support material afterwards. If you're using the same material as the main print for the support material, it can usually snap off pretty easily, but it sometimes leaves sort of a noticeable marking and spots and imperfections where it was. And so you usually need to go back with some kind of deburring tool or a file or something to kind of like finish it off. But if you're able to use a different material, especially one that does not mix well with your main material, then you can get really clean support. So a really common combination for that is to use PLA and PETG because they don't stick together very well. So if you try to combine both in a model, your model's gonna fail and fall apart. But if you print a PLA model with PETG supports, those supports will just basically tear away super easily. So I put my very limited 3D design skills to the test and made this that has some wings and windows that all require supports, and that way I could try different supports on the X2D. So this is the first test of my little design that has some what I'm calling wings and windows. And you can see the PETG with no prime tower. There's no prime tower over here. It's pretty messy. There's bits everywhere. And you can see the supports themselves are stringy and incomplete. There's one structure on each side that needs a support. But you can see here that once the other three were finished, this fourth one just kind of gave up. And then this is sort of bridged in a weird way. So this support's actually not even doing anything. Also, it broke in half. So what I'm going to do now is reprint this with a prime tower just to see if that makes the PETG supports better. And I'm also going to do it at just a little bit of a smaller scale just to save material. There is a huge difference with the prime tower, even though this is a smaller version of the model, which is more detailed and intricate, which I thought might actually make it difficult. The quality of the PETG is way better with way less stringing, and they all actually completed. This was the one that didn't even finish last time, and it went all the way to the top. There's still some dust and debris and detritus over there, but significantly less. So adding the prime tower made the print significantly better with the PETG. Now this one only took a quarter of the time. This was 30 minutes. The other ones each took 2 hours, and this was just all PLA for both the supports and the structure out of a single nozzle. So significantly quicker if you're doing all one material, but let's see how the supports actually get removed. And with the PETG, you can see that it just sort of pulls away, falls away really easily and leaves a very clean surface behind. And if you look at both the models together, the one that had PLA supports and the one that had PETG supports, you can see a huge difference in quality after the supports were removed. But again, there is some nuance to that because with at least using PETG as a support, I needed to use the prime tower in order for it to actually do a good job. And that then really increased the print time. It almost doubled the print time for this little shape. It's also probably worth noting that Bambu does have specific support material filament that you can use, and I've ordered some, but it's not here yet, so I'm excited to see how well that works, and maybe that kind of just solves all the problem. It'd be nice if you didn't need to use the prime tower because that would save material and save time, and then still give really good supports and support tearaways and stuff. And while we're talking about that second nozzle, it's also important to talk about how it works and how you load filament into it. The X2D has a modernized version of an old school Bowden extruder that sticks on the back of it, and that is where the filament from the external roll, or I guess if you attached an AMS or something along those lines, whatever external filament you're using, it's going to go into that external Bowden extruder and then be pushed into the second nozzle. I think Bambu did a pretty good job at taking an old school style extruder. This is what all my 3D printers had like 10 plus years ago, and modernizing it and simplifying it as much as possible. But especially after you've used like an AMS, it really does kind of feel like going from driving an electric car to a Flintstones car where you're like powering it with your feet and stuff. So when you're loading an external spool, you do have to input the filament info manually. That is actually super easy to do. You just select the type of filament and the color and you're good to go. No problem there, and that's gonna give the printer all the temperature information that it needs, but you also have to physically load the filament manually. So unlike an AMS where all you need to do to load filament into this is put your filament in there, pop it in, and that's basically it. And then it's going to tell the printer exactly what's loaded and we're done. So it takes about 10, maybe 15 seconds to load filament, and it does it all automatically. To load the second nozzle on the X2D, you have to go through the menu and do a few manual things. You have to feed the filament in manually until it goes to the extruder, and then you have to wait for the printer to tell you to kind of push it in more. You'll feel the extruder grab the filament, and then it's going to push it into the nozzle, and then it actually does need to heat up the nozzle and purge some filament, and then it will tell you everything is loaded and ready to go. So that is a more old school process. And then it's the reverse to unload filament. You need to heat up the nozzle, pull the filament out, roll it back up by hand. It's not the most difficult thing in the world, but it is a more involved process. And especially if you're brand new to 3D printing, there's just a little bit more room for error. And that's really one of the more subtle points I want to talk about as we transition to comparing the X2D more directly to the P2S, is that the X2D does have a lot more features, like the second nozzle, active heating in the chamber, the exhaust fan. You have kind of a lot more going on here, but everything you add also adds in an element of complexity. You have the second nozzle, but now you have this external Bowden extruder, which is a totally different type of mechanical thing to be comfortable with to use that second nozzle. The P2S, on the other hand, is, I think, a very good example of just streamlined simplicity. It is a single nozzle, it's not actively heated, it's not as advanced as the X2D, but it is the printer where if someone is brand new to 3D printing and they've never touched a printer before and they want to get into it, but they're a little bit nervous and they're not sure if they're going to like it, or if, it's maybe just too overwhelming for them, this is a printer I can easily recommend and feel like they're going to have a lot of success early on. You're going to get this printer, you're going to get it up and running in no time, you're going to start printing, and hopefully then it's going to kind of click and kick in and sort of excite you about the hobby and making stuff and trying new things and all that and learning more about it. The X2D can absolutely do that as well, but especially if, again, looking at that total beginner, zero experience, I would kind of expect that if someone got the X2D, they might come back to me in a week and be like, yes, I got it up and running, it's working, but they might have sort of a list of issues they ran into or confusing points or mistakes that they made as they kind of learned how it works. If you're experienced with 3D printing or you don't mind putting in the extra time to really learn right off the bat all the details you need to know, then the X2D is a more powerful and more capable printer than the P2S. But if that doesn't describe you, or you just don't want to deal with any of that stuff, and especially if you're just going to be doing simple, essentially single nozzle PLA prints, you don't necessarily need everything the X2D has, and then the P2S is right here. So as I grab some of my notes that I made to compare these two together, the first few things that I noticed is the X2D is significantly louder than the P2S. Neither printer is totally silent, but this one is noticeably louder. I'm guessing that's because it has the external fan, the external exhaust fan, and also the tool head in here does have a smaller fan on the side. There's more parts. It's a louder printer to use than the P2S. Just worth noting. Now, as we're talking about that second nozzle, a big benefit to that, in addition to using extra filament, is a reduction in waste. So I have another example here. These are Dungeon Crawler Carl bookmarks, and each one uses 2 colors of filament. The white and blue one I printed on the P2S, the black and orange one I printed on the X2D, and the black and orange one, only produced a couple little bits of filament waste because I was able to use 1 color per nozzle. Since this is PLA, I could use PLA in both nozzles, and both were actively printing, so it really saved a lot of waste. But something I'm a little bit confused about is the bookmark I printed on the X2D with dual nozzles took 1.7 hours to complete, and the bookmark I printed on the P2S with a single nozzle took 1.5 hours. So the P2S, a single nozzle printer printing multiple colors in this very specific case, was actually faster than the X2D with dual nozzles. I have no idea why. It's a mystery, but I wanted to highlight that just because it kind of points out that while the second nozzle is a very cool thing that offers a lot of functionality, it's not quite the same as like having a built-in second 3D printer. And so some of the restrictions with that second nozzle mean that you should not be using TPU in it. You should not be using things like PLA silk or engineering filaments, stuff like ABS. This does have an actively heated chamber, so ABS is pretty easy to print with the main nozzle, but you don't want to do that with the second nozzle. But even PETG is kind of on the like print with caution list, and I used it for supports, and once there was a prime tower, it worked fine. So you can do a bit of experimenting, but with Bambu's other dual nozzle printers, the H2D, the H2C, you can put any filament in either nozzle and not have to worry about it. So this does not work the same way. You kind of got to be a little bit more aware of the tool you're using while you're using it. And I have actually heard a few people say that just taking the second nozzle out of the equation entirely, and just the fact that this has an actively heated chamber with better exhaust and the included fan, that actually kind of makes it worth it over the P2S for the $100 difference in price. And I think that is a completely valid argument. And then the second nozzle is just icing on the cake if you ever use it at all. But again, there is some subtlety here, because that's not to say you can't print ABS and those types of things on the P2S. I've done that many times and it's been completely fine. So you just have a bit more control by being able to actively heat things, whereas this just sort of holds in whatever heat happens to be generated while the printer is on. This can kind of dial it in a little more specifically. And you can see that because when you look in the chamber and you compare the two, you sort of see that there's a lot more happening on the left-hand side of the X2D than the left-hand side of the P2S. The X2D also includes a calibration camera on the tool head for that second nozzle, just to make sure things are working okay. But if I take the build plate out of the X2D and the build plate out of the P2S, these are the exact same size, so you can interchange them or use the same types of extra third-party plates that you would have on the P2S on the X2D. But the X2D does let you build 4 millimeters taller. So slightly, ever so slightly more build volume in the X2D than the P2S. That is probably not enough to make it a worthwhile purchase, but it's just, this is 256, 256, 256. This is 256, 256, 260. And I kind of have glossed over the print quality a little bit, but both these printers print excellent. That's kind of table stakes with a Bambu printer. It's going to print great. In terms of the actual quality, I don't notice any difference between them. My test print for the X2D was the little toolbox, which I really, really like. This is the second one of these I've printed. I've had quite a few people ask about this little toolbox, and the tool kit that comes with the printer has a QR code for the model there. I can also put a link in the description if you just don't want to deal with that, but if you're wondering where it came from, this is Bambu's specific design, and I like it, and especially using the X2D, it was a chance to do 2 different colors and use the 2 nozzles and all that, which was fun. But I want to hop over here for a second and talk specifically about the P2S with a suggestion slash theory that I think might give it a more specific and clear place within Bambu's printer lineup. Right now, I think there's a lot of confusion because if we go to the X series, the X2D is $649 for the printer, and then it can also be $899 with the AMS combo. And with all of these printers, I genuinely recommend that you get the AMS combo because that really kind of unlocks their full potential. But again, if we go to the P2S, it's $549 for the printer and then $799 for the combo. And that is where a lot of people are just kind of saying, well, I'm just going to spend $100 and get a printer with more features. And I think that that totally makes sense. And a lot of people, even if they think they'll never use those features or they don't really need them, it's just kind of like better to need it and not have it than have it and not need it. Wait, no, better to, what? No, better to have it and not need it than need it and not have it. But there's something I haven't talked about yet in this video, and that is this right here, which is the P1S, which is still available at a really great price, $399 for the printer, and then $549 for the combo with the old AMS unit, and $639 for the combo with the new AMS unit. Do you see how that might be a little bit confusing? So the P1S is a fantastic printer, and I don't think that Bambu will stop supporting it soon, but part of me is really wondering, what if they discontinue the P1S? In terms of print quality, it is absolutely exceptional, every bit as capable as the P2S and the X2D. But in terms of design and compatibility and components and interface, it's using a lot of older stuff that really doesn't fit within Bambu's current lineup. It doesn't really match. And even here, looking at the combos, the fact that it kind of can still support an old AMS or it could support a new AMS, but if you get the new AMS, then it also has to have these things here. It's adding a little bit of friction and messiness into an otherwise pretty clean product lineup. So here's my thought or my theory. What if Bambu discontinues the P1S, which has been on this sale for a long time, so it's almost like they are kind of, you know, blowing out inventory, and then discounts the price on the P2S. I don't think the P2S could be as cheap as the P1S is, although if that were possible, then there'd be no competition. But imagine if they just lowered the price at least another $100. So the P2S is $449 for the printer, and then $699 for the combo. That is something that I think would really help differentiate it between the X2D, because that $100 price difference, I think there are a lot of people who, even if they're not sure they need all the features of the X2D, they're just going to get it, to be safe. But $200, or if they can make it even more than that, a larger than $200 price difference, that's where I think people are going to be more willing to kind of sit back and really consider what features they need, which features they don't need, and then make the proper choice. And it also then gives the P2S a much more specific place in Bambu's lineup, whereas right now it's being very much overshadowed by the X2D. If it were a little bit cheaper, then it is a very clear, like, this is the step up from the A series. You have an enclosed printer, you have the AMS Pro 2, you have, really strong, streamlined simplicity. It's a great printer to learn on. It's a great printer to grow with. It's a very tough printer to outgrow. It's good for schools, it's good for print farms, and it would be at a price that makes that super clear, while then the X2D is already at a really good price for everything the printer does, and that is there if you want to kind of step up and have some of those more advanced features, or you have a workflow where you will really benefit from those things, or maybe you're just not quite ready to jump up to the H series. There is the H2S, which is a single nozzle printer. It's like a higher end P2S, and then you have the H2D for $1,749, the H2C for $2,400 that are both dual nozzle, or in the case of the H2C, multi-nozzle, you have up to 7 different nozzles. That is a very different price jump. And so the X2D is much more approachable with its smaller size and smaller price to go along with it, but still pretty darn capable as long as you understand its limitations and are willing to work within those. So with where things stand right now, with a $100 price difference between these two, I do think that it is a very valid decision to just decide to get the X2D over the P2S, because you get a lot more features for not that much more money. If you're already spending $800, spending $900 isn't that much of a difference to get, a lot more features. But I do genuinely think it's worth asking yourself if you will use those extra features, because if you get the active heated chamber and the second nozzle, but all you're printing are PLA prints that require a single nozzle, or super simple multicolor prints that again can easily be done with a single nozzle, then you don't really need the X2D, not just because there's extra features, but again, every extra feature is an added bit of complexity and is an added point of potential failure or potential maintenance and issues. So simplicity has its own value too. And I do think though, that if Bambu is able to do some price adjusting, keep the X2D where it's at, and lower the price of the P2S, then that is going to help make the decision a lot more clear for a lot more people, and also give the P2S a more specific purpose within Bambu's lineup. But if you want to know more about Bambu's entire printer lineup, I do have a separate video where I cover the entire thing from A to Z, or I guess I should really say from A to P.